Hey, good day everybody. How's it going? Well, I suppose I'll get right to it. Propose a question. Do you love your kids more than you love yourself? This one goes out to all the parents out there who understand where I'm coming from when I talk about the idea that when you're doing self-reflection or working on your personal life and you're trying to raise children at the same time, you kind of have to hang it up for a little while. Now, there are a lot of people who let me kind of go back here. You don't have to hang up working on yourself, but many of the decisions that we make for ourselves as individuals, we set that aside for the better of, say, a couple when you get married. And the same thing happens with children. We set aside our wants and desires to help our children. And so society has instilled this idea that we would do anything for our kids and that we should always be willing to sacrifice ourselves for our children. Now, as a parent, yes, I would jump in front of a bus to save my kids. That's something that I think a parent does, not just because society tells us to, but because we believe that, let's just put it this way, we know that we're going to die one day. And we know that the only thing that we can leave is more people or a better world behind for other folks. So altruism or sacrificing for other people isn't just a matter of feeling good inside. Animals do it as well. In fact, it's interesting because altruism, which is helping other animals of the same species, can go, it's interspecies. We've seen, cats raising puppies or dogs raising kittens, that kind of stuff. But this happens in nature with various animals. And the question is, why? If it's not of the same species, then what are you perpetuating? Well, it seems like the whole of, animal kingdom wants to preserve the whole of the animal kingdom, so to speak. So animals will help other animals that may not be considered, that are not part of their species. It's just very interesting. So anyway, back to humans. Since we think and we're conscious, we have many decisions to make. Our reasoning or our thought of logic gets in the way of just acting impulsively to help other people. For example, if you see someone who is, about to fall and you can save them, you're going to try to save them because as a human we want to help one another. But what if it means that you may fall too? You have to make a split-second decision. So with children, we have this idea that since they were our blood, since we're responsible for them, we had them, we're raising them, that we should do anything for them. And pretty much we do as parents. But what I was asking myself was, what is the line where we do things for ourselves? In other words, when is a child at the age of accountability to where a parent should not have to sacrifice their well-being for, let's say, the well-being of a child? Now, most parents who have older kids would say there is no time, that a parent will sacrifice for their child any time in their life. An example is right now, my mom's always been poor, and I've always been poor. But if I were to go to my mom and say, Mom, I need to borrow $500 so bad, she would loan it to me, even if she didn't have it. It's just because moms would do that. Now, I'm the same way. I don't have shit, but I loaned my mom a couple hundred the other day. It's just what family does for each other. But it seems that we view it differently when a parent gives money to a kid. They assume, even if the kid's a fully grown man, that, oh, well, that's just what parents do for their kids. And like my mom's helped out my brother in the past, and I've said, why? Why are you doing it? She says, because I want my kids to be happy. And that's totally understandable. So I've kind of wrestled with that idea of when is it time to say, look, I have to live my own life, get your own shit together. You've flown the nest, you're gone. And I don't really think that there's ever a time where we won't help our kids, but there is a time when we have to help ourselves. Just to kind of give you an idea, I grew up with a brother who was 3 years younger than me. And I'm 40 now, he's 37, and we constantly were arguing, fighting like brothers do. And then, our father passed away when I was 15, he was about 12, so we were, my mom was forced to deal with us as, two crazy brothers. Well, I now have the same thing going on. I have a child who's 6, a child who's 3, and then another kid who's 21, and he'll be 22 this year. So this is why I can feel like I can talk about the differences between, raising kids and having adult children because, well, I have both. And so I get it, and I understand. The funny thing is that I was telling my oldest son this. When you get to your age, into your 20s, you start to finally realize that there is nobody out there who has it figured out. That there's nobody out there who has it together. When you're young, especially when you're under 18, you believe that when you're an adult, you hit this point where you're stable, where you've figured things out, where you finally understand. And then you become an adult and you feel like you're never quite there. This is why, even as a parent helping an older child, they want to seek your help because they want your guidance, because they know that you're more stable. The truth is that really it's not always like that. Sometimes it's even worse. Sometimes the parents are even worse off than the kids. The kids have finally found out what they want to do with life, and maybe the parents lost a job, or they're not doing what they want to do anymore, or they don't know what they want to do, and it's difficult to break away from that programming. I know that because I'm still stuck in that program from when I was young. And my poor mom's stuck in the program too, because she was raised to believe you get a career, you retire, and you just, have your white picket fence and you do what life tells you to do. And now she's breaking away from that in the last decade or so, and she's become overwhelmed with the amount of, evidence out there that basically we've been consistently lied to. But we got into a conversation yesterday about technology, because my kids are growing up and using the iPads and stuff we didn't have as a kid. And she's very opposed to it, And I was trying to explain to her that, and she knows this, but it's easier said than done. A parent, let's say someone who is of a generation who they've already raised their kids and their kids are gone, it's easy to say, oh, the kids of today are playing with their technology. But when I was a kid, it was Game Boys or whatever, and before that, it was, we still had Ataris. It just, we didn't play them 100% of the time. We weren't distracted always by technology. But here's the thing: there's a difference between playing asteroids on an Atari and shooting, stupid rocks in space, and getting on an iPad and having my 6-year-old listening to TED Talks or science shows so he can learn how the universe works. He was explaining to me the other day about black holes and white holes and antimatter and particles. The kids of today have to be ahead of the game. So, as a parent, you feel like you're being overly nice to your kids by giving them too much time on these devices. And what people are afraid of is like what my mom said, what happens when the devices get taken away, And I said, well, people just adapt, Well, let's say the power went out tomorrow and there was no more internet. Oh, well, we would adapt. I guess that's a good example is when I canceled my cable. My wife was kind of reluctant. Around the time we had our first son, like about 6 years ago, we decided to cancel our cable completely. And I was like, let's just get rid of it. I'm sick of commercials. I don't want to have anything to do with this or the news, and we won't miss it. So there was kind of a weird period where we didn't have background noise or news or commercials, and then you just get used to it. You fade it away and you realize that you didn't really miss it at all. But if the internet disappears, of course, it'll be a totally different story, because we use it for so much more than just, looking at videos or games. I mean, we're learning a lot if we choose to. And this is why it's a double-edged sword, I guess, or you can look at it as a weapon or a tool. I mean, a person could sit on the internet all day and just waste time watching other people's videos about what they think, and repeating what they've heard, and saying the same things over and over, or reading the same things that agree with what they believe. And in the end, never learn anything, because they're not out there trying to learn. They're out there trying to convince themselves of things. So, what do we do about, as far as kids, and how much are we supposed to give our children? How much space do we give them? I guess I want to go back to that for a minute, because wow, it's 1980, beautiful, awesome. We punish our children, and we don't want to. And it's very difficult to punish a kid for doing something that kids just do, but we have to. And I hate to compare kids with dogs, but anybody who has a dog knows that, if you raise your dog without punishing him for doing wrong things, if you never scold him, he's just going to step all over you, and he's going to treat you like shit, and he's going to be the alpha. It doesn't matter if you're a male or a female. If you don't punish your dog for doing wrong things, then they'll continue to do them. But when you do punish your dog, they may get upset at first, but it seems like you'll notice as a dog owner, your dog will come up and come closer to you after you've punished him, as almost a thank you for showing them what to do. And kids are exactly the same way. All animals are the same way. In other words, kids are out there pushing buttons, expecting to be pushed back, so they know their limits. And parents are afraid to say no, 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 and tell them what not to do. And I'm guilty of it too, trying to over-explain why something is the way it is. Because I don't want to be the parent that says no because I said so. I like to have a reason for things. So trying to sit my kid down and explain that too much time on the internet floods your brain with neurotransmitters like dopamine that create a reward system. And kids understand this. Don't think they're dumb. I was told my 6-year-old this yesterday. I said, the reason why you like the video game so much is because it triggers the reward center of your brain, and he goes, sugar does that. So don't think that kids aren't aware of this. I guess it depends on the kid, but I said it's exactly like sugar. And that gave him, something to compare it to. Yes, it triggers your brain just like sugar. Of course, I wouldn't even mention drugs. He doesn't know about that yet, but our brains are just, wired for that. They're not just wired for reward, but they're wired to learn and to know what our limits are. So you teach your kids their limits, and they respect you for it. And it's hard to do sometimes. So what if we do that to ourselves? And we punish ourselves in a way for doing things that we know that we shouldn't do. Yet, instead of putting ourselves down, we stop at that and realize that, no, we can be our own dog on our own leg, so to speak. That didn't come out right. I'm thinking of a dog rubbing up against a leg, not humping a leg. So that at a point we can make a decision to, instead of beating ourselves up, stop and say, cool, I've learned from myself by punishing myself, by beating myself up. Because we're still learning, just like the kids are. We're adults, but I say we as if you're all adults, and I'm assuming you all are. I'm sure there's a couple of youngsters out there. Here's a good example, vaping. It's something that I would beat myself up over because I'm like, well, I'm still inhaling, vapor. And a lot of people would justify it by saying, oh, but it's better than smoking. We do this a lot to ourselves. We compare things to make them better or worse. But anyway, that's a different story altogether. I'm getting off subject. Kids. You want to trust them, and you want them to trust you. And the only advice I could give to any young parents, any parents who have kids, is through my experience as one parent with my oldest son, when he was growing up, my wife and I raised him to respect us. So when he did something he shouldn't have done, rather than yelling at him and pointing at him, we'd shake our heads and tell him we were ashamed of him. And not in a way where we were putting him down. But shaming a person does a lot more than yelling. And over a period of time, it comes where he'll come up to us and he would tell us things that he'd done that he would never have to tell us because he felt guilty. And we're doing the same thing with our other kids. My 6-year-old came up to me, his mom the other day, and said, Mom, I have to tell you something. Last night I took the iPad late at night and I played it for a while and then put it back. We would have never known. This to me, it just opens my heart. It's like to have a kid admit something that he's done. Not because he's afraid, but because he feels guilty about it. That's what I'm trying to instill in my kids. And that little metaphor is how I feel about society in general. That we need to do this for everyone. If somebody does something wrong, don't yell at them. Don't put them down or tell them that they're stupid or ugly or dumb so they have more ammunition to just assume you're just wrong, that you're just a fool. Shame people. It's like what I talked about yesterday in that video about celebrities and people who are recognized just for being famous. We need to shame those people, not the people who are famous. It's not their fault that they're famous. We need to shame the people who talk about them. We need to shame the newspapers, the tabloids, and we do, and we are. And this is what's happened with people are almost embarrassed to admit that they buy things like the National Enquirer, which in the 80s was everybody bought that, And now it's like, oh, I just buy it for a laugh. That's what people will say. They open up with, and no person will say, oh, I buy the National Enquirer because it's the only real news. Although I'm sure there are a few, but our obsession with things like that, with menial nonsense and bullshit, we're showing society, we're making society feel guilty for that. So the way I apply it and see the children of today is that they're growing up with such a flood of information that even us as adults are trying to learn and assimilate. They're learning at the same rate as we are because the internet's only been around for 15 years. So all the things that I know, my kid's going to know in no time, and then some, and I expect my kids to be smarter. So don't be afraid if your children are smarter than you. I really hope that my kid can call me out on a lot of stuff in life. My oldest son, I try to teach him as much stuff as I can so he can try to relay that to people that he cares about. But I'll tell you something, this comes to mind. I feel really bad for my oldest son because he's like a philosopher like me. He thinks about life and existence, and he does it because, it's something that I always told him was important, self-reflection and thinking about life. And now I feel like I may have almost done him a disservice. And I'll explain that. It's because if you teach your kids all the mysteries of life and teach them too much philosophy, they get way wrapped up in it. And this is great. My son, he's going to learn a lot about himself, and by the time he's my age, he'll be well advanced to where I am in mental, alchemy and working out thought patterns, training your mind to think properly. But a side effect of that is loneliness. And somebody just left a comment on a video of mine earlier about just this, actually. They were saying that where do we find people like this? They said people need to form groups or something to get together because the internet's the only place to find people who are like-minded. And the more extreme your beliefs or thoughts, or not beliefs, but rather the more you ponder and the more open your mind is, the harder it is to find like-minded people who haven't already drawn a conclusion to the way things are or whatnot. And so my son doesn't have he doesn't have very many friends or any friends really to talk to about deep things. And he says he hangs out with them, and he'll be hanging out with a group of friends, and he'll start talking about something deep, and they'll just kind of, back off. And he seemed distraught by it. And I said, dude, you're going to face this your whole life. People who don't understand you, people who don't understand where you're coming from. But it makes me think deeper about, should we be thinking that deep? It goes back to the old simplicity. To bring it to the point here that eventually he will get to the point where he can set aside all the thoughts and just live. That's kind of what I'm working on right now. I've spent the last 10 years engulfed in different ideas, whether it be philosophy, religion, politics, trying to understand how the world works and why it works the best I can. Not to prove anything or own anything, but to own my own reality. To understand why things are the way they are to a degree where I feel comfortable with life, no matter what it throws at me. And I think that's something we should all aspire to be comfortable in life, whatever happens. And shit's gonna happen. I heard somebody say earlier that, they said something that kind of disturbed me. He left a comment on a video and he said, within the next 5 years, I'm probably going to kill myself using an inert gas. And, when I hear comments like that, is it a cry for help, or is it a cry for attention, or is it dead serious, or is it just somebody who's upset with life? These are kids who have grown up with, and I'm just assuming that it's somebody who's young, but I could be totally wrong, with this overwhelming sense of urgency that life is just something we're supposed to struggle with, or something evil, something bad. It seems like life on earth to a lot of people is a constant struggle, not because of anything that happens to them in particular, but because of the way that we view the world. And that's a very difficult hurdle to overcome. I think one of the most important things we can do for people like that is just be friends and have friends. And back to what I said earlier about the guy who said that there are no groups to get together to meet people who want to be better people. There have been plenty of them. Unfortunately, most of them have become suspect and ridiculed. In fact, the movement of Freemasonry, the original intent was not to ever own the world or dominate anyone or start any wars. It was a group of men coming together to try to understand the deeper mysteries of where we come from and understanding who they are to better their lives and that of their fellow man. And in the process, they had to hide from people who had already made decisions about what life was about, such as the Christian church. And so they had to hide and go underground. Everybody who has ever thought alternatively from mainstream has had to go underground or else be burned at the stake. And today it's a metaphorical burned at the stake. which means that my oldest son, when he's, say, at the workplace and he starts talking about some crazy politics or mysteries and stuff, he might lose a job or lose friends or lose coworkers over that kind of stuff because people don't want to hear it. And I know all too well, because I've lost more than one job over my political views. And I'm not talking about left or right wing. I'm not, just my views on life or religion, because I'm not the kind of person who just shuts my mouth in a group of people who are making claims that I don't agree with. So, but I'm trying to raise my kids to be the same way, and trying to hold my fucking tongue so I don't tell them to be as outspoken and intense as I am, because, you know, it can cost you. In other words, being awake also means being asleep to a lot of basic life simplicities. Once you've woken up from the reality that you're not just here to work and retire and die, once you really see, I mean, and I don't see how people can't see this. This is to me like it's so obvious. It's like seeing color, or, you know, maybe it's just like seeing a new color. You know, being able to see that reality that every minute really does matter, and every moment in life really is precious. And it just seems we take it for granted because we're griping about silly little things that really don't matter. And so, anyway, hopefully, if any of you have kids out there, you can kind of relate to this, and we can bring a generation up, not that thinks the way we do, not that thinks differently than we do, but that thinks. Take care.